An hour later, the ship's public address system announced that all Army personnel would be prepared to disembark within the next few hours. There would be lorries, trucks waiting to transport us to designated areas. They finished the formal announcement with a good luck and good hunting. We all thought that was rather prophetic and took it as a good omen or a cautionary advisory. We landed at the port of Le Havre and immediately boarded a huge tractor-trailer trucks. These trucks of the Red Ball Express of the Quartermaster Corps were semi-trailers cut literally in half the top and covered with tarpaulin. The only the trailer we rode in, I should have stood up, and which had no canvas on the top, but it was open into the elements of the bitter cold. So what those were, if you're going to describe them, it sounds like they're tractor-trailer trucks where they cut the whole top off of them.
Yeah, and put the whole troop, whole division in those.
And what would you sit on?
Sit on they put the boards on the side of the upper foot off the floor.
And so they're just regular cargo transport trucks converted to take a lot of people, correct?
Well, I don't think it was converted. I think it was just what they had.
And how many soldiers fit in the back of that truck?
I would say probably 30 or 40 when they were jammed in.
They were jammed in. Mm-hmm. We herded into them much like cattle. So you herd into the truck just like cattle.
Yeah.
With our duffel bags, each trailer would take roughly 40 to 50 soldiers. Standing with their equipment, we would hang on to the curved metal canvas supports that straddled each side of the trailer. Since there was no canvas, it was a bitter cold ride with no way to shelter yourself from the cold and the wind created by the rapid movement of the tractor. The drivers had no concern about the human cargo, nor did they care about our safety. So what do you tell me? The drivers just drove like a bat out of hell?
The what?
You said the drivers of the trucks had no concern. Did they just drive out like a bat out of hell, the drivers?
Well, yeah. They were all colored too.
They didn't care.
Huh?
They didn't care about no one's safety. They just drove like hell, right?
Yeah. They weren't supposed to get to the spot to get to the spot, that's all.
They whisked down the narrow streets of a small farm towns at breakneck speed, escorted by several MPs on motorcycles, the sirens wailing as the red lights blinking. After an hour or so near freezing conditions and holding on to the uprights overhead while the driver maneuvered the curves and winding roads at great speed, we finally reached our destination. That must have been one hell of a ride. You had nothing to shelter you from the wind. And was it real bouncy back there?
Yeah.
Extremely bouncy? Was it extremely bouncy?
No, they're regular commercial trucks.
There was nothing there but a large expanse of an open field. The questions on everyone's mind as we stood in the road: where do we bunk down tonight? We expected a warm place, shelter from the cold wind. Instead, we were dumped into an open field and nothing in sight for miles.
Slept on the road.
They just dropped you in the field.
Yeah.
Suddenly, a familiar voice rang out. H Company over here. It was Sergeant Rupert, the first I've seen of him from Haverfordwest. So how did Rupert get there, Sergeant Rupert get there without you seeing him on the boat or the truck? He was there before you.
Well, he come in with the officers. You didn't see Goodnight either.
First squad over here, he yelled out in a southern twang. You better hurry before it starts to rain or you're sleeping wet tonight. He drawled his usual twinkle in his eye as if he was enjoying every minute of watching us squirm and fidget, trying to adjust to our new way of life. Leip and I formed our tent with two shelter halves and started to stretch it out on the stakes when it started to rain. We managed to set it up before the larger rain came down. We sat inside on the ground looking at the rain coming down, dejected and hopelessly bewildered and a little frightened. I took out my poncho from my duffel bag and put it on my helmet liner. I told Leip I'd go outside and reset the stakes before the tent came down on us from all the rain. So it was really raining like hell.
Yeah.
Wow. It was coming down quite hard, and there were puddles forming around the perimeter of the tent. Water would be inside shortly, but I got busy and I dug a trench for the water to drain away from the tent. I asked Leip to pass out the entrenching tool to trench around the tape. Others had the same idea. As I looked up at what was an only empty meadow with nothing but trees and scrub brush, there were now several hundred pup tents and neatly rowed. Somehow seeing all those tents made me proud and confident that despite everything, we would do all right over here. Sergeant Rupert came by in his poncho and helmet liner and informed me that there was a straw available at the nearby farmhouse. I relayed my message to Leip, but he only said that he did not want to get wet for some itchy straw. After completing the trench, I walked to the farmhouse, picked up 2 bales of straw, and carried them back to the tent. After cutting up the baling wire with my trench knife, I began to spread the straw inside the floor of the tent. I told Leip that we needed 2 more bales, but he insisted I go, since I was out in the rain and wet already. I remembered with the bales of straw, and Leip helped spread them about, which gave us a foot of the soft straw and putting our sleeping bags on. Post had not arrived with our Jeep trailer. Therefore, we had no sleeping bags for tonight. Leip was lying on the straw and politely instructed me not to get it wet, as I was drenched. I ignored the remark and stood outside as the rain had stopped. I noticed the field kitchen heat beginning to set up. It was the only bright spot in the already dismal picture. Fink came by and said there would be hot coffee and sandwiches in about 20 minutes. GI coffee, emphasized with a smile. Leip heard the news, and I could hear him searching for his canteen cup. I told him to fetch mine, and shortly thereafter he appeared at the entrance of the tent with the cups. We walked towards the field kitchen and got our first whiff of freshly made coffee. It smelled great, and it put a whole new perspective on our situation. As we stood around drinking the hot GI coffee and eating bologna sandwiches, we found that we're outside a little town called Haverfordwest.
It's French.
Haverfordwest, 40 to 50 miles southwest of Le Havre. We would be here for several days or until our road equipment arrived. Then we would be assigned to various locations. We're also informed that there were reports of German parachuters in GI uniforms in the area to be on our alert. So you're already having problems with reports of Germans in your immediate area. We will be issued live ammunition for our individual weapons, which we were to carry at all times from now on. There would be a large contingent on guard tonight, and we would get our assignment later that day. While we were being briefed in the latest situation, unknown to anyone in our division, One of the greatest battles of the war was forming up several miles to our north, the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler was making his all-out offensive of the war. It would engulf thousands of Allied troops, in addition to several elite divisions in our immediate area. We would not know the entire outcome of this engagement until way past its final stages. Even though we participated in a small part of the operation, we did not actually know the full extent of the big picture really was. We were green troops with very little leadership in the division. We relied mostly on our individual initiative to carry us through. There were a few months where our learning mode, and we were quickly adapted to our situation, with the loss of many lives and wounded. Being bivouacked in a meadow in early December, oblivious to what was taking place in our midst, with staying dry and occasional hot meal, our only concern was to be shattered in a short order. There was church services and confession for all the Catholics at a nearby church, for all those who were not on guard duty or some detail. Fink informed us that our squad would be pulling guard duty from 0100 to 500 hours, and that we are free to attend church services, which began shortly. I grabbed another canteen cup of coffee and walked back to our tent to tell Lape I was going to church service and asked him if he wanted to come. He declined the offer and said instead he would take a nap in preparation for the guard duty later tonight. The church is in the middle of the town of Yavatont and was several hundred years old, but beautifully maintained and decorated. There were many civilians attending, as well as many soldiers. I found a vacant seat in the rear, almost adjacent to the confessional. The French townspeople greeted me warmly and would utter something which I did not understand. There were quite a few GIs scattered throughout of the church. When there was an opening in the confessional booth, I entered rather reluctantly. I did not speak French, and I wondered if I was going to have a priest receive my confession. As I crossed myself and finished my "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," I was surprised to hear the voice from the other side of the curtain speak in perfect English. Father had attended seminary in Philadelphia for several years and was pleased to hear my confession. For my penance, he gave me 4 Our Fathers and told me to recite the rosary for the next 7 days.
Yeah.
And to make a good act of contrition. Back outside the church services, I decided to walk to a little village. As it was not raining, I still early, although dark outside. It was the first time I seen or stepped in any place where people spoke a foreign language. As I walked a single unpaved street with its tiny cottages and barns attached to the main houses, I compared it somewhat to Haverfordwest, but much of my own primitive level.
And so that's exactly where again?
What was that?
What town are you in now?
Haverfordwest.
No, that was in France.
It's a French town.
French town.
Y-V-E-T-O-T. Y-V-E-T-O-T. Do you know how to pronounce that? Y-V-E.
Yup.
Say it again.
Stop, thing, I don't know.
Y-V-E-T-O-T.
Shit.
Normandy.
There were no civilian vehicles about, but much more on a primitive level. Only American military and most of the townspeople either walked or rode bicycles. There was not much to see, but the people were friendly despite language barriers. I soon lost interest and started back to our area. The road leading back was more of a cow path than a road, and of course there was no lights to speak of. Not that there would be any help as they were all black out to the entire continent. As I approached the bend in the road, a voice slightly shouted out, "Halt!" I immediately stopped, bewildered and confused. "What's the password?" The voice once again commanded. "I don't know the password," I replied, completely taken back. I then remembered what Sergeant Rupert had said about German paratroopers disguised as Americans. I shouted out, "I'm with the 291 H Company, 1st Platoon." "What is your CO?" the voice demanded. I could not see anyone. "Captain Dreward," I brought it out. "Fink is my squad leader, and I'm from New York State." "Name me a couple cities in New York," the voice said. "Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Rochester, Elmira." I stated relieved that I recalled so many. Okay, the voice shouted and told me to advance and be recognized. As I approached the bend, I could make out two figures crouched behind a light machine gun. They were from the F Company. As they waved me by and then passed their gun position, they whispered the password was Betty, and the reply was Grable. Betty Grable. I thanked them before I reached the area. I was challenged twice more. I was thankful the troops were learning quickly and took their guard duty seriously, even though it was being done in an amateurish and novice manner. I reached the tent and I could hear Leap snoring. I crawled inside, closed the flap, and reached for my flashlight in the duffel bag. I laid it on the top of the duffel bag and began searching for my toothbrush, toothpaste, and a canteen cup. When I found them, I turned off the flashlight and crawled out of the tent. I walked over to the mess tent and a liter bag of water. The mess tent was deserted, but I was sure there was guards somewhere, and near vicinity not only watching for Germans, but also for hungry GIs, foraging for anything to eat. After brushing my teeth, I threw away the remaining water and entered the tent. Despite the fall in temperature outside, the tent was relatively comfortable due to the abundance of straw on the ground. I was thankful for the straw, since Post had not arrived with our sleeping bags.
You're always short on getting their stuff there, Dave.
Yeah. I once got my overcoat and used it as a blanket as I stretched out on the straw. I only hope I did not itch something terribly by morning. I pulled the wool cap over my ears and faced my closed eyes. I would soon be time to go on guard duty. I thought of Ann and Jean and my mother and sister and concluded that none of them would imagine that I'd be sleeping in the middle of a field with an overcoat for a blanket. I did not understand it myself and shortly fell asleep. There were more talks of Germans wearing American uniforms. We were told especially be careful while on guard duty.
Guard duty.
Be especially careful on guard duty and stay alert at all times. We would not take anything for granted, but since the challenge, everything that did not appear normal. A light flickering in my face woke me up. It was Fink getting us up for a tour of the guard duty. Lape was confused and did not want to leave the warmth of the tent. With a little persuasion from Fink and me, he soon got up and was outside, waiting for the rest of the squad to go and to our post. It was cold outside, almost cold enough to snow, and I was thankful I had long johns on. I could imagine Lape was freezing without them, although he did not complain about the coldness. We were told the password was Betty Grable, and to challenge anyone with no exception. Lape and I drew the light machine gun position, the same one that I was first challenged with. Both the men from F Company recognized me, having challenged me earlier that night. Lape and I settled in, and I thought of a long, cold night ahead of us. We checked the gun and noted how many boxes of ammo there were. It was quiet, and to our inexperienced eyes, the mind's every shadow and rustling of a leaf was a German soldier. I told Lape not to talk. to stay awake and keep his eyes and ears open. The time dragged and it was getting colder by the minute. Lape wanted to get up and walk around to keep warm, but I insisted they stay put and not make any unnecessary movements. As it finally reached 0300 hours, there was nothing moving out there. I could almost hear from the big clock in the church ticking away, and I wished it would tick faster. I spotted what looked like a series of small, flickering candles down the road toward the town. Now I could see sound of many engines. My first thought was tiger tanks, but I rejected the idea. They were not strong enough for the tanks. I knew we had to challenge them as they approached, but how with all the noise and our engines were making? I did not want to send up a flare or give someone our position, but they were fast approaching. Suddenly I spotted someone walking in the middle of the road, and I quickly hollered out, "Halt!" And I was immediately answered with "Betty," and I replied, "Great, Grable." As he passed our position, I whispered, "What's passing through?" The lone figure replied that were the road vehicles of the 291st just getting in to hook up the rest of the regiment. I thought Post must be in a convoy and that we would have our warm sleeping bags once again. After the truck had passed our position, there was a complete silence once again. I was getting cold from squatting and kneeling in one position for so long.
How long was the guard duty for, Dave? Do you
3
know?
hours.
3 hours?
Yeah.
How long was your guard duty for?
2 hours, 2 on, 2 off.
Oh, okay.
I was sure Lape must be feeling the same discomfort, but strangely enough, he was not complaining. We were still jumping up and would get all tensed up at the slightest distraction, thinking there were German paratroopers around. We were held in check somewhat, but very thought we had live ammunition in our light 30. We wanted to be positively sure before we fired it. As I became more cramped and stiff from the cold, I could not wait until our relief showed up. The time was dragging by, and complete isolation of our post made it harder to pass time. We could not talk about our body movements were relatively restricted. Besides, we were situated to monitor the area and challenge anyone suspicious trying to enter our safe area. We would stop them before they got out of the encampment, if nothing more to warn the rest of the regiment. Finally, our own relief showed up, and we told them it was quiet, too quiet, and nothing was going on.
So what time did they relieve you, John?
Huh?
What time did they come to relieve you in the morning?
Well, every 2 hours
So 5 o'clock in the morning?
till light.
Oh, wow.
That was the best news I heard in several days. Lape and I headed for the mess tent. We picked up our mess kit way over. And when we got to the kitchen, there was already 20 or 30 men milling about, eating and drinking and quietly talking. The coffee smelled good. As the PFC Schroeder, the second crew, greeted me, I informed him that I was glad to see him once again and delighted that he was back in business. He smiled and loaded up my mess kit with pancakes, sausages, and hot syrup. I balanced the canteen cup on my hot coffee with my other hand while I looked for a spot to enjoy my breakfast. I finally rested my breakfast on the hood of a 6x6 and took a long sip of hot coffee. This was the best tasting coffee I had since leaving Haverfordwest. The breakfast was also the best. I went back for seconds along with the coffee. We were told to stay in the area as a company commander was going to brief us shortly. As the rest of the company came into for breakfast, I spotted Post sitting in a Jeep enjoying his pancakes and sausage. When he saw me, he gave us the usual cheery, congenial greeting. "Hello, Jocko, glad to see you," he uttered between bites of pancakes. I asked him how he made out in the crossing, if he had lost any of our equipment. He said he did not lose any equipment, but it got pretty wet as they crossed the channel, and LSTs, which were open-ended landing crafts. We got a little seasick, but otherwise it was not any worse for the experience. I told him we would check all the equipment after the briefing and get our sleeping bags for tonight. I then asked him where he was sleeping tonight, and he answered in a motor pool area about a half mile from where we are. As Post would not extrapolate one thought at a time, my curiosity was aroused. I asked him what his sleeping arrangements were, and he replied, "Why in the Jeep, where else?" I thought that was pretty democratic for a guy from New York City with both parents an attorney and himself a 3.5 years at college. I liked Post. He was not like most of the other ASTP GIs. He was personable, and his candor was refreshing and enlightening. He did not try to impress anyone, nor was he ostentatious sense of personal worth. Who cares if he did not bathe as often as everyone else? He certainly did not smell that offensive. Captain Drooler drove up in his Jeep. As he stepped out with his driver, I noticed they were both wearing new type of cambine boots from the Army, being to issue a select view. It was a high-top shoe, similar to the conventional boot we were wearing, but it had 4 to 5 inches of leather band at the top with 2 strappings in the buckles. It was much superior than the old type shoe and much warmer and drier. I wondered if we'd be ever issued a pair like that. We gathered around Captain Jeweler for most of this was the first or second time we've actually seen him since he took over, and for Captain Goodnight back in Breckenridge. He told us that there would be here for another day, checking our equipment and waiting for our support companies to rendezvous. The only board, they would then board 40 times 8s for our trip up to where the war was. As we talked, his mannerisms and demeanor made me dislike him more than ever. He would look away as he always talked, and everything about him bestowed the fact that he did not have our best interest as a personal commitment. So I'm going to leave it up here at the beginning of page 262. I'm going to leave it up here
Okay,
at page 262. You want to play some back or you want to talk?
yeah, whatever you like. Okay.
Play back.